So we're going to be speaking about university admissions. A lot of people get confused on why does somebody with 4 level 7s didn't get accepted in a certain university. And making the university choice is the most important decision that you would make in shaping your career. So if you want to know how do my grade 11 marks or how do my grade 12 marks, how do they guarantee me a spot in this university that I desperately want to go into this career field that I desperately want to go into? How do they actually consider applicants in that position? And what factors go into them selecting in that specific field? A lot of people get confused on the minimum requirements, and they get confused on what is a minimum requirement. And if you ever maybe saw somebody who has 4 distinctions or 5 level 7s and they didn't get accepted in a certain university, and you wondered, okay, but why? What factors do they actually consider on the application for them to be considered? Is it luck? What exactly happens in the university admission? So we're going to break through that so that as you decide on the university, you actually know what is the university admission. How do they select in the selection criteria? How does the selection criteria go about? Because a lot of people get confused on the minimum requirements. So let's start speaking about the minimum requirements. The university gives out the minimum requirements in order for them to sift through the applications, right? So if they give a minimum requirement for a course of APS of 30, this is the minimum requirement. That minimum requirement, or you meeting that minimum requirement, doesn't guarantee that you're going to be accepted in that position, in that course. Meeting the minimum requirement doesn't guarantee you acceptance in that course. That is very, very hard to understand and accept for a lot of people. So the universities make the minimum requirement because they don't want to go through every application that doesn't qualify. For example, if they say that course requires you to have life science, physical science, pure maths, English, it helps them to know, okay, if you've got tourism, mathlet, CAT, and history, you don't belong in that course because they've given out their minimum requirements and their selection, right? So they're trying to avoid unnecessary applications that do not qualify or fit into that role for them to apply. But it doesn't mean that that minimum requirement is going to get you accepted. So it also means that you meeting a minimum requirement doesn't guarantee you that position. So what does it mean? If a university says this course, for example, nursing, let's make an example with nursing. If they say nursing minimum requirement is APS of 30 and they get 8,000 applications, of that 8,000 applications, 1,000 of them have an APS of 35 and up. So the highest mark they get is an APS of 40 of a candidate that is applying for a course that requires minimum requirement of 30. So now that means when they sit down to do the selection, they're immediately going to start in this 1,000. It's like, it's obvious. They're going to start to select from the 1,000. Now, this is 1,000, right? And they only have space for 245 people. So now that means in this 245, are they going to take somebody with an APS of 31, or are they going to take the 250 from people with an APS of 36, 37? Because these are people competing for the same course, for the same spot, and they only have 250 spots. So that is how they do with the minimum requirement. So when you sit down and you say, but I've got your minimum requirement, but I've got this, it doesn't mean that you're going to get into that position. You're going to get into that course. It doesn't mean. And for somebody to get an APS of 35, 36, 37, 38, that means that person must have had an aggregate of what? 89, 90? So if you've got an aggregate of 75% and you're competing with people who've got an aggregate of 91, 92, and you say, okay, but I've got an aggregate of 85, why didn't I get in? That is because the competition was high. And this year, the competition is 10x more than it was last year. So if you know a certain person that is doing their final year and they got into medicine because they had an APS of 81, they had an aggregate of 81%, but they got into medicine. This year, that is 2 times. People with 100% in maths are applying for a position, for a course that needs APS of 30 minimum requirement. So those are the people you're competing with for that position, and they only have 240 spaces. If you want to see the exact proper way of doing university applications, I'm going to link the post here because I've discussed in this video in detail about how to do university application. I've also discussed about bursaries. I've also discussed about what to avoid on bursaries, what to avoid when you're doing bursaries, what to avoid on university application. I've covered UJ, UP, VERDS. I've just covered UNISA. So you can check all those videos up. I'm going to link them up after this video. And I'm always open to hearing what you guys want me to cover next. And the topic of university admissions was discussed and was brought up, and I wanted to come and discuss it. So if you have applied to only one university, please ensure that you apply to others. If you had gotten only one provisional acceptance, do not think that that provisional acceptance is going to guarantee your spots. Apply to other universities. If you, for example, you've only applied to CAO, which maybe gives you 3 universities, you can still apply to UJ, you can still apply to Northwest University, you can still apply to other universities. The same goes for bursaries. If you've applied to one bursary, it doesn't mean that bursary is gonna give you space. I had applied to 5 bursaries last year for a certain student, and 3 of those bursaries declined them, and they only got approved for 2 bursaries, and we had to select one of the 2 because you cannot take 2 bursaries at the same time. But if, for example, I had only applied to only 3, then you wouldn't have gotten a bursary. So please make sure that when you apply, you're not only applying to one, and do not get the first acceptance and say, okay, all is well, but still add other universities. Okay, thank you so much for watching. We'll see you in the next video.